Murderer vs. Murderer, Students 12. But, before I start the story, don't forget to subscribe, like and turn on the notification bell to support this channel. Also, don't forget to comment what story do you want to hear next. Boomerang? Zhang Zhao looked at Bai Yutang. "Bai, are you sure?" Bai Yutang frowned slightly. "I saw something similar before when I was handling a case," he said, and called, "Hey, Huzi, you come to Leaf's dormitory. You can take a look at some things, and call Gongsun to come together." Hanging up, Bai Yutang looked at Zhang Zhao. "Let Huzi see if it is right." Zhang Zhao nodded, walked around the corpse and went to see the furnishings in the room. After looking around, Zhang Zhao found that this dormitory was too clean and tidy as a male dormitory. Zhang Zhao stretched out his hand and touched the railing of the bed. There was no trace of dust. Looking back at Bai Yutang turned around and asked the teacher, whose legs were so nervous, "The boys' dormitory in your school is quite clean." Teacher took a deep breath, shook his head and sighed, "This is the only one." "Oh?" Zhang Zhao looked back at the teacher. "How do you say?" "Leaf is famous for having a cleanliness addiction." The teacher shook his head helplessly. "His cleanliness addiction is already serious enough, and he cleans the dormitory as much as possible, and he wipes the floor with a napkin. Do you think the room is clean?" "So the other two roommates have no opinion?" Bai Yutang was curious. "Oh, there is one person who has never lived here before. Because he is a local, he has all gone home to live. He only puts things here. Wang Pen rarely lives, because there was an empty shop in the dormitory, so he stayed there." "In other words, Leaf has always lived alone, right?" Zhang Zhao asked. Teacher waved his hand, shook his head and said, "I know what you are thinking. On the contrary, Leaf is actually very popular. Everyone does not live with him because he is afraid that he will have to clean up afterwards." "Boss." As he spoke, Zhao Hu opened the door and came in, followed by Gongsun. "Look at it." Bai Yutang spoke to Leaf's corpse. Zhao Hu frowned. He squatted down to look at Leaf's feet and saw that his feet were tied to the legs of the stool. Zhao Hu stood up and said to Bai Yutang, "The boss, maybe gangster, had cleaned the door, murdered technique." "Can you see who did it?" Bai Yutang asked. Zhao Hu thought for a while, and said, "Boss, this is indeed a way to clean up the door, murdered technique, but something is wrong." "Oh?" Zhang Zhao and Bai Yutang looked at each other and asked Zhao Hu, "What's wrong?" "Well, the so-called clearing of the door means that after the traitor is found, he will be punished according to his identity and the number of brothers killed." Zhao Hu whispered, "Traitors are usually tied to chairs with their hands and feet tied. And then, use a knife to cut the traitor's flesh alive to kill him, and it usually cut from the left arm. But his hand is not tied." Zhang Zhao looked at the deceased's wrist. There were no binding marks on it. This victim were plucked, cut off, after they died. Gongsun squatted down to check the deceased's ankles tied to the stool. There are no scars on it. There is no one who has been plucked alive and wouldn't resist, and judging from the amount of bloodshed, it was definitely made like this after he died. Zhang Zhao and Bai Yutang looked at each other. There are at least a few hundred pieces of minced meat in the bag. This little student shouldn't kill hundreds of gangster brothers, right? If this were the case, the police would have long been a sensation. Also, Zhao Hu said, "In fact, there is no pure gangster in S-City now." Bai Yutang nodded, "I agree with this. Basically, I have been doing well. Now the economic crisis makes it difficult to be a gangster and many have changed their careers." Zhao Hu smiled and said, "Most of these methods are done by big gangs. Listen to you, the layout of this scene is not professional enough," Zhang Zhao said, "it's like an imitation case." Bai Yutang also nodded, "But there are not many people who know this technique, and the purpose of using this boomerang method should to convey some kind of message. In addition, the technique is not very original, aka copycat, and maybe it convey some imitation of information. This boy's habit of cleanliness is indeed very serious. Zhan Zhao pointed to the books on the desk, and said, all are wrapped in pure white book covers, arranged in order of height, short, fat and thin. Clean addiction has some obsessive-compulsive disorder. Bai Yutang shook his head, and said to his heart, he is much better than me. Zhan Zhao seemed to see Bai Yutang's thoughts, and leaned over with a smile. Xiao Bai, if you continue to develop, you will be the same as him. How about it, do you want me to treat you? Bai Yutang smiled slightly. Seeing that no one was paying attention, he approached Zhan Zhao's ear and said in a very low voice, okay. Let's try it out in an outdoor swamp tonight. Zhan Zhao glared at him, and Bai Yutang laughed. You have to be tempted to sacrifice. Is it a cat? People died in the wee hours of the morning. Gongsun roughly inspected the body and said, from the knife mark, more than one person cut his flesh. Oh? Zhan Zhao walked over to look. I have checked the pile of pieces just now, some are left-handed and some are right-handed. Meng Qiang is left-handed. The teacher said, the twins are right-handed. Zhan Zhao and Bai Yutang glanced at each other and keenly discovered the meaning of the teacher's words. Listening to your tone, I seem to doubt those three students. Bai Yutang asked the teacher, why doubt those three people? The teacher looked at Bai Yutang and then at Zhan Zhao, saying, the three students are very out of group, and their behavior is weird. Because Leaf is the monitor of the class, he often communicates with the three of them, trying to persuade them to correct their evils. Are they always annoying him? Zhan Zhao shook his head slightly. It's just friction between students, don't you need to use such ruthless means? This is a death case after all. Bai Yutang smiled slightly. If I were you, I would have said everything. The teacher turned pale, thought about it, nodded helplessly, and said, there are indeed some situations, but the principal didn't let me say it. Yeah? Bai Yutang raised his eyebrows. You'd better say it. It's better to say here than to go to the police station, isn't it? Teacher sighed and said, we have found out a long time ago. Those three people are dealing with some drug dealers and underworld people, black society. In short, there are some people come to tell the school, and the school can't control them. Why not expelled? Bai Yutang frowned slightly. This is a police academy? It's all future cops. If it is not clean, free from black society, wouldn't it be the black sheep, spy, sent to the police? That, the school actually has difficulties. The teacher explained, that Meng Qiang, his family has a strong family background and power. Bai Yutang and Zhan Zhao looked at each other, and there was nothing to say. Not long after, the forensic staff completed the collection of evidence at the scene. Liu Tan waited to call back and said that they had not found the three students inside or outside the school. He also called the students' homes to ask, and the answer was that they had not returned for a long time. The mobile phone number obtained from students' family had been called, but no one answered it. Others asked the students, and they didn't think highly of them. Wang Peng also said that the last time to see Meng Qiang, Qian Kaiming and Qian Kailing was when they had a dispute with Leaf at the school gate yesterday. What were they argued about? Zhan Zhao asked someone to bring Wang Peng and asked him at the door of the dormitory. I didn't hear clearly. They started to fight while arguing. Meng Qiang, Qian Kaiming, and Qian Kailing was total 3 people and Leaf would be at loss if they fight. So I went to fight too. Wang Peng stood at the door of the dormitory, trying to see what's inside, but the door was closed. Bai Yutang laughed when he saw him curiously. You'd better not look at it, otherwise there will be shadows in the future. Meng Qiu said to Leaf when he was leaving. Let him wait. He must make him look good. Wang Peng said with a sad face. It was pretty ruthless at the time. Zanza and Bai Yutang looked at each other and asked Wang Peng, do you know the address where Meng Qiu and the others are renting outside? Wang Peng hesitated for a moment, and said, I only know that it is in the community behind the school, very close to the school. Zanza and Bai Yutang asked the school for photos of these three people, and took Bai Chi and Luo Ten to leave the police academy and go to the community behind the school. This police school is really outrageous. Zanza shook his head, who dares to use such students? Bai Yutang smiled. Mao, Shi-Chi was also cultivated here. Bai Chi blushed, nodded and said in a low voice, it has always been like this here. By the way, Chi-Chi. Zanzao also felt a little strange. This is your alma mater. Why do you seem to have no feelings at all? Bai Chi shook his head and whispered. It's all bad memories, so don't think about it. In fact, most of the students trained here are now either transferred to clerks, or are still on patrols, or district polices. Then you are considered the best. Luo Tan felt curious, that principal seems to be quite powerful. Why doesn't he get close to you? Bai Yutang and Zan Zhao also nodded in doubt. Hey! Bai Chi scratched his head in anguish. I'll tell you, the teachers have never known about the relationship between me and the Bai family, because my father forbids me to talk about it for fear of special care. However, the principal used to scold me. For me, he is not as kind as he seems. While talking, the four of them had already come to the door of Xingfu community. They asked the officials and several security personnel, and learned that Meng Qiu and the others lived in room 408, building 29. Bai Yutang and others quickly reached the door of 408 and rang the doorbell. The doorbell rang for a while, and no one answered the door. Bai Yutang frowned suddenly and whispered, there is something inside. Luo Ten also nodded, leaned on the door and listened for a while. Zan Zhao raised his eyebrows in confusion. It looks like an animal is calling. Do you have a dog at home? Zan Zhao wondered. Bai Yutang winked at Luo Ten, and the two of them stepped back and prepared to hit the door. Bai Chi was a little worried. Isn't it okay to go in like this? Zan Zhao touched his head and blinked at him. If someone asks, they say they heard someone calling for help. We suspected that the lives of the three students were threatened, so we went in. Bai Chi is helpless. These years, he is too honest to be a police officer. Bai Yutang and Luo Ten stepped back a few steps, and at the same time stretched their feet. With a boom, the door was kicked open. As the door opened, a group of dark shadows rushed towards the two of them. Bai Yutang's eyes were quick and his hands were quick. He stretched out his hand and pulled the thing's tail, and flicked his hand. With a boom, the thing was thrown out a long way, hit the wall all at once, and fell to the ground. It made a low growl and looked nervously at the people standing at the door. Dog? Bai Chi stared at the big dog with hunched back and teeth. What kind of dog is this? Zan Zhao frowned. Why is your mouth so pointed? Look at its tail. Bai Yutang pointed to the dog with its thick and drooping tail. This is simply a wolf drooping tail. This is simply a wolf drooping tail.